Unsealed documents made public revealing how the U.S. government changed the terms of the bailouts provided to Fannie and Freddie back in 2012, causing outrage on the show yesterday, remember?
The discovery documents, which are now being put out related to the Fannie-Freddie lawsuits, are showing that the United States government lied to the American public.
We have documents that came out today of the single largest financial crime in America's history.
Joining us once again are Dick Beauvais from Rafferty Capital, along with Josh Reisner here back with us, Set from Graham Fisher and Company. So as this comes out yesterday, confirms to you that what? That Treasury was saying to itself, hey, we have a gold mine here, so we want to profit from Fannie and Freddie
Very simply, I'd lay it out as the government knew what their legal, or I should say Treasury, and the regulator and conservative of the GSEs knew what their legal obligations and responsibilities were under the law, willfully and intentionally violated those because they saw a honeypot, have now stolen $270 billion from the GSEs and have covered it up now for since 2008, but certainly since 2012.
The whole idea, Michael, back then, correct, was that these companies have to be rescued because they're effectively bankrupt, right?
Which came out in the documents as well. There was an analysis presented in 2008 by BlackRock to Treasury and to Freddie that said in 2008, even under our most stressed scenario, we don't see either of these companies insolvent.
Well, I mean, in the moment,
today, we didn't know.
Today,
that's
if we took
right.
Lehman into receivership and kind of left it out there with a stub public equity, you'd say it's a really profitable company.
Well, that's absolutely right. So that's where the issue really stems, is let's not go back to 2008 and the crisis. You make decisions that may or may not ultimately be proved out. But in 2012, when the government changed the terms of the agreement, going from a payment of a dividend, 10%, to sweeping all future profits, the government said, well, we're doing this because the companies are at risk of having to draw again, even just to make the dividend payment. And what we found out yesterday was the government knew very well that the companies were on the verge of sustained and massive profitability, and they wanted to take all of the money, even though in court they said explicitly they wouldn't make any more money by doing this than they would have had they stayed with the 10% dividend.
So Fannie and Freddie, just to catch people up on what's been happening over the last couple of years here, have sent tremendous profits to the Treasury. Is that right? And that has made it much more difficult to deal with how to resolve them, correct? I mean, because this remains an open question. You have investors who bought shares of these institutions thinking that they would get that profit stream diverted back to them. That has not happened. They continue to fluctuate on every report that it may or may not happen going forward. And I have yet to hear if there is a government plan that's viable right now in terms of saying either we're going to fully nationalize these institutions or we're going to privatize them. We seem to be stuck in some sort of middle.
Well, let's go back a little bit. First off, these companies were not bankrupt in 2008. They had positive cash flow. What the government did to make it appear that they were bankrupt was they forced the companies to give up their deferred tax assets, and they forced them to put a ridiculously high loan loss provision, which would reduce their capital, making it appear that the companies were in trouble when these are two non-cash charges and the companies were not in trouble. And we know in hindsight that they weren't even remotely close in trouble of going bankrupt. Number one. Number two, the government clearly in HERA, which is the Housing Economic Recovery Act, said that these companies were supposed to be put back on their feet. And what the Treasury Department did and what these documents show is that they had no intention whatsoever of obeying the law. The Treasury Department did not want to obey the law and was not going to obey the law. Number three, you've got the whole issue of protection of private property. Capitalism is based around the theory that private property has a predominance in terms of the laws of the nation. This Treasury Department went out of its way to make sure that they would grab the private property of these shareholders without compensating them. And then the big one, number four, they knew clearly, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that these two companies were about to show massive increases in profit, and they went to the American public and said, these companies are in trouble, they're going to need more of a bailout, and therefore we're going to take these profits. what should happen? If the court system of this country had any belief in obeying the law and the sanctity of private property, the government has got to give back to the shareholders at least $100 billion. At least $100 billion.
Josh, last word.
Well, and that goes back to the issue of, had these documents come out before any of the court decisions, we likely would have had very different outcomes. Going forward, we may well. Remember, these are only the first 36 documents out of what will be almost 10,000. Okay, the government has to hand over 10,000. And what we found is the government said, we're going to make a loan to you that you're never allowed to repay. Now, to me, that sounds like loan sharking. Right? This is a crime. This is a serious crime. And it wasn't institutional, the government. It was specific actors abusing their authorities.